Fred. The name's Fred. Last week we talked a lot about the idea of that for us to be able to love our neighbor, the first thing that we have to do is to learn a name. I asked you all this week to take some time this last week to somebody that you come into contact with that you learn their name. Fred. Do you have a name for me this week? If I were to ask, if I were to say, hey, say out loud the name that you came in contact with this week. Our family was Fred. Or are you sitting here thinking, oh, I was supposed to do that? I didn't do that. I feel really bad now. Well, you should, because his name is Fred. Friday, Nova and I were working up at the office, and we stopped and got some lunch, and we're on our way back to the office. And as we're driving down Bennett off of Madison, Nova and I notice a car that's heading towards the Walgreens in that area there behind the McDonald's that decides that they're going to take a shortcut to McDonald's down the hill. They cross lanes in front of us, drifting, and hit the curb and stop. And I stopped the truck in front of them at first, and Nova says, they need help. There's something wrong. And I agreed. And so I moved the truck around them and I put on the flashers and I stopped. Self-preserving, of course, I thought if I leave my truck in front of whoever this is who's trying to drive down into McDonald's from the hill, that they may hit me, and I don't want that, so I'll go around them so all else fails, my truck's safe when we're trying to help this person. I know it's a little selfish, but we stopped. Anyway, Nova got out, and I've got the flashers on, and she runs up to the window of the man named Fred, and she says, hey, are you okay? And the older man is slunched over the steering wheel, and she says, my name's Nova, what's your name? And he said, my name's Fred. She said, are you sure you're all right? You're kind of in the wrong lane. Do you need some help? And he says, well, I've got really bad cataracts, and the sun's so bright I can't see. And Nova says, well, he says, I just need to get down, and I just need to get back over and start driving. Nova says, I don't think that's a good idea. She says, how about this? And I'm paraphrasing here. I can't give it as good as Nova does, but Nova runs back to truck. She says, follow me. I'm driving his car. And I'm thinking, oh, this is okay. So she's talked the guy into getting out of his car, getting in the passenger seat. And she hops in the car and she says, hey, Fred, where can I take you? He says, I need to go to Hy-Vee. And she says, I can take you to Hy-Vee. And I'm turning the truck around on the road and getting there to follow her. And we go into Hy-Vee. And he says, I got to get some things at Hy-Vee. And she says, can we call somebody? He says, I have nobody. Can I call a spouse? I don't have a spouse. Can I call a neighbor? My neighbors are in worse shape than I am. We're thinking, whoa, that's bad. Can I wait here for you to finish shopping at Hy-Vee and drive you home? No, I have more errands to run. Scary. But as slow as he was going, we figured by the time he got out of Hy-Vee, it'd be dark. So he refused to let us help anymore. But his name is Fred. And every night since then, my children and I have been praying for Fred. See, for us to be able to love people around us, and we talk about this month when we're talking about the idea of love, we talked last week that it starts with a name. Here's the deal. I can't tell you the number of times that I've driven by and I've seen somebody who's had problems and somebody else stopped, and I thought, okay, well, it's covered, and I went on and I never thought another word about it. I never put anything into my thoughts at all. I can't tell you the number of times I've stopped somebody on the side of the road to help them fix a tire or to take them somewhere, and I do it out of kindness because I think that's what God wants me to do. And when it's all said and done, it's out of my mind. But not this time. Because his name is Fred. because my family's invested in Fred. God calls for us to love our neighbor as ourself. Dad did a great job reading the scriptures today on what it is to love. When we've been singing our songs, it's what it is to love. Our theory, the idea this morning is that love is more than a theory. See, I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, I had this idea of what it was going to be like when I got married. And I knew exactly how it was going to go, and I knew what I was going to do, and I knew that my marriage would never have arguments. We would live in the best places. We would do the most fun stuff, and I would never have any problems. And not only that, but in my mind, I had this theory and this idea of, I knew because I had went to college and I'd been educated on what it was to take care of children and to raise kids. And I knew exactly how I was going to have obedient children and how to make that happen and how they were going to follow everything and they were going to be the poster children for church. My kids were not going to be the preacher's kids. My kids were going to be different. Oh, and but don't kid yourself. And then, as I went through school, I had it all figured out on how to be a great minister too. And I knew exactly what it was going to take and what it was going to do, and the plan that my church is going to be doubled in 2 years. And everybody's going to be on fire for Jesus Christ. And we're going to save so many souls we don't want to do it ourselves. And I had it all worked out in my mind. But there's only one thing about it. That theory is something else than reality. See, the thing about it is the simplicity of theory in reality gets really complicated. The things that we think that we know before it happens gets really super complicated. The more simplistic the statement, it seems like to me, the harder it is. And this is true in the scriptures as well. In Matthew 22, we know this story so well, but I'm going to go over it again. And I'm going to show you the simplicity of what's being said here and just how difficult it is. Matthew 22, starting in verse 35. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Now, let me rephrase that for you into the way that they heard it. We read it like that and go, oh, that's such a simple question. What he said was, Teacher, there are 613 laws according to Jewish customs. Which one of the 613 is most important? That's what he's really saying. Teacher, I have followed 613 laws. Which one is the important one? Sounds a lot different now, doesn't it? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Jesus said, let me give it to you in simplistic theory. Here it is. 613 laws. Love God. Love those who are around you. That is great. If you really stop and you think about it, out of all the things that you have to do, the theory is so simple, right? All I really need to do as a Christian to really follow God is to love God and love you. That is simple. And yet it's so difficult. Because loving others is a messy business. See, once we get to the point of where we start loving other people, it's not always pretty. Because some people, believe it or not, have a tendency to be hard to love. I know you all are thinking, well, not me. Me either. But believe it or not, there are some people that are a little hard to love. Sometimes love gets a little complicated because it gets a little messy. Love is not always convenient. See, Nova and I had other things that we needed to do that day. And yet, because of her love for another human being, for her neighbor, all of a sudden, even though I had things I needed to get done, our kids had things they needed to get done, we had special things that we were doing as a family on Friday, and yet she was able to say, "Where can I take you? How long can I wait? What can I do to make your life better? Because I'm called to love my neighbor." Now that gets really messy when we're trying to pick up kids, finish printing the bulletin, make sure we're here for all the presents from Share My Smile, take care. The important stuff for me, wash the truck, things like that. All of a sudden it gets messy. Love gets inconvenient and love gets messy. I love this in Proverbs. Sometimes Proverbs have these nuggets that are just wonderful. And I want to read this one with you today because I giggle when I read this. Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox comes the abundant harvest. You understand what he's saying here in Proverbs? When you don't have cows in the pen, you don't have poop on the floor. That's what he's saying. When there are no oxen, the manger is empty. It's clean. It's convenient. But the strength of an ox gives you great harvest. See, it's easy for us to not take the time to know the name of our neighbor. It's easy for us to hear it in a sermon and go, "That's right, I should do that," and then blow that off because we know that if we know a name, there may be a sacrifice. If I know a name, they may need something. If I know a name and they know my name, they may call me and ask me to do something that I don't want to do. They may ask for me to give something that I don't want to give. Whether that be my time or my money or my emotions. And when we look at Proverbs, he says, yeah, it's messy, but it's worth it. I want you to understand that loving your neighbor sometimes is going to be a messy process, but it is worth it. C.S. Lewis writes in his book, Four Loves, this little paragraph, and I wanted to read it this morning. There's no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it up carefully, round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in a casket or coffin of your selfishness. You don't want to get hurt by love. All you have to do is just be selfish. That's all you have to do. C.S. Lewis writes it in such a way that he says, don't even love an animal because they're going to cause you pain. But on the backside of that, we need to understand that love is everything. The scriptures that were read during communion today and the scriptures that we look at, Jesus' life example, he is the epitome of messy love. You look at the people that he comes in contact, it's messy. Last week we looked at Zacchaeus. We looked at a man who was hated by the entire community, that when Jesus said he was going to his house, people sneered and talked bad about Jesus, and it made him have more difficult time because of who he was hanging out with. The same with the lepers, the demon-possessed, the adulterers. Over time and time again, Jesus loved them. He loved them from where they were at and who they were. And sometimes the people that he loved, there was never a spiritual return, but he loved them anyway. And ultimately, he gave his life for us. He sacrificed himself on the cross for all of us. Whether we choose to accept that or not, his love for us was not limited. And it was messy. And love gets messy. But we need to understand something. It's only through action that this theory becomes reality. See, we can read the scripture and we can quote it all day long. And the rich young ruler, when Jesus said, here's what you need to do. Whenever he said, I've abided by all these things, 613, I've got them all on my checklist. I've done it all. Lord, I have done it all. And Jesus said, let's get out of theory and let's get to reality. See, the theory is, as Christians, we are to love our neighbor. The theory is that we should not hesitate to know the name of our neighbor and to take care of other people. The theory is that we are a loving, generous, kind, loving people that represent Jesus Christ in our daily actions. And in theory, that's wonderful. But if we don't put theory into reality and actually do this, then it is nothing. It means absolutely nothing to the people around us, and it means absolutely nothing to the Lord. See, that young man had done all these great things. And when Jesus said, let's make this a reality, let's do this for real, let's go all in, he looked at it and said, I don't think so. I'm good with 613 in theory. I'm not really great with this one in reality. It's too hard. But Jesus still loved him anyway. The way that we start changing lives, the way that we start living out this love is by starting by loving one. I challenged you last week to start with a name. And for whatever reason, some of you all did and some of you all didn't hit a name, but it's not too late. I'm not asking you to memorize everybody that you met this week or this next week. I'm asking for a name to start by loving one. This week, are we capable, church, of loving one? Let me show you what I mean by that. There's 109 of us in here today. That means, in theory, there could be 109 people in our community this week that we could learn the names of, that we could love, that could be in our prayer lives, that we could say kind words to, that we could say we know who you are, we care about who you are. And we could begin to plant the seed into 109 people in our community's lives. And as that seed grows, as we open up the line of communication, as they become a part of our lives, then the opportunities to share Christ become enormous. And we know that from the parable of the seeds, that the seed will be cast in all kinds of different avenues, but there will be good soil that will be spread in that 109. And out of that good soil, there will be much production done if the seed is planted. But the seed can never produce if it's never casted. And in theory, this morning, 109 will gross us a great return for the Lord. But if theory is just a theory, if it's not reality. See, I can come back next week, and I just might, and say, can you shout out your name? Who's your name? And it could be silent just like now. And that theory was a great theory. But there's no produce. Or we can make a reality, church. And today could be the day that you look back. Every year we take at the beginning of the year and we look back at what we did in the last year. How incredible would it be that if you made your resolve today to get that name, to start loving that neighbor, that as we sit here at the end of next year, Lord willing that we have a next year, that there's a chance, there's a likelihood that name that you shout out next week could be sitting next to you next year because you are willing to learn a name, because you're willing to make love thy neighbor real. Mother Teresa says this, and I think it's very fitting. It keeps us into reality. Never worry about numbers. Help one person at a time. And always start with the person nearest to you. Makes it simple, doesn't it? We don't have to worry about how many you are going to reach out to next year. Who's the person closest to you? Who's the person you're coming into contact right now? That's where we start. That's where we start making a difference. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We have it down. There's no doubt in my mind, church, that as a church, we love God with everything that we have, with our hearts, with our very souls, with our mind, and with all of our power of our strength. I see it in you all every day. I see it in your actions that you do. Now it is time for us to love our neighbor. Love our neighbor. In the midst of all the things that are going on this holiday season, there's all these opportunities to let people know who you follow. And there's a lot of people that for this month figure out how to love a neighbor. But we love our neighbor indiscriminately. We love our neighbor by picking up something and dropping it underneath a giving tree. We love our neighbor by dropping change into a can. I'm asking you, church, to love your neighbor by knowing a name. To pray for a name. To pray for that person, their well-being. And to look for the opportunities to harvest what God is growing in them because you know their name. And they know that you know their name. Church, we have such great ability to love. You are sitting here in your chair today because somebody loved you. Because somebody loved you enough to tell you about Jesus Christ. Somebody loved you enough to bring you here. Somebody loved you enough to share the gospel with you, to give you the good news. It's your turn to love somebody else now. This morning, if you have had time in the midst of all this season, it's been hard for you and you've kind of wondered, am I loved? I want you to know that you are, that God loves you deeply. And maybe for some of you all this morning, you've gotten so wrapped up in buying the presents and getting the last things done and decorating the house and putting on the lights and all the things that go along with that, that you've forgot to stop and to love. I want to encourage you all this morning that if we can help you in any way to get your mind ready to do this project, that you allow us to do that through prayer. If you are going to take this morning like Sarai is and give your life to Christ, we want to help you with that as well. So if we can help you in any way this morning, will you allow us to do that as we stand and as we sing?